Our world was mapped by ancient merchants, not by modern cartographers. Long before anyone drew a global map, a hidden web of pathways connected distant civilizations. This video explores 15 forgotten trade routes, the lost arteries of history that stitched together continents and cultures. You will discover how these networks of spice, stone, and silk laid the very groundwork for our modern, interconnected world. How did Roman emperors wear jewelry from the frozen Baltic coast? Why was a simple desert salt block once worth its weight in gold? We are journeying far beyond the famous Silk Road to uncover stories of resilience, an exchange that most history books leave out. What does it mean to be connected in a world without borders? A piece of hardened tree resin, glowing like captured honey, could travel from the freezing edge of the Baltic Sea to the sun-baked palace of an Egyptian pharaoh. This was the power of the Amber Road, Northern Europe's first great golden highway. For thousands of years, peoples living along the Baltic coast gathered this fossilized resin, washed ashore by the waves. To them, amber was more than a pretty stone. It was a piece of magic, solidified sunlight holding warmth and life within it. This belief in its power created a desire that stretched across the continent. Traders would move south, following the great rivers like the Vistula, their packs heavy with the golden cargo. They navigated dense forests and crossed the plains of Central Europe, eventually connecting with the sophisticated trade networks of the classical world. In Rome, amber became a symbol of extreme luxury. The historian Pliny the Elder even complained about a Roman knight who paid more for a single amber figurine than he would for a living, healthy slave. The demand was insatiable. Elites wore it as jewelry, believing it warded off illness, and craftsmen carved it into intricate amulets and even gaming pieces. But the proof of this route's ancient reach is even more startling. Archaeologists have found Baltic amber in the royal tombs of Mycenae in Greece, dating back over 3,000 years, and even in the burial sites of pharaohs in Egypt. This means that long before written history detailed the route, amber was moving hand to hand across a continent. The Amber Road was never a single path, but a shifting web of river routes and forest trails. It turned the Vistula River region into a bustling hub, where Germanic, Celtic, and later Slavic tribes met, exchanged goods, and inevitably shared ideas, art styles, and technologies. The flow of amber south brought Mediterranean goods and influences north in return. Its decline was slow, shaped by the fall of Rome's economic power and later, by the rise of Viking traders who opened new northern sea routes. But for centuries, this golden thread connected the barbarian north with the civilized south, proving that the pull of a sacred luxury could forge connections where maps saw only wilderness. While amber flowed from the frozen north, a different kind of treasure moved across the scorching south, one measured not by sight but by scent. Picture a line of camels 1,000 strong, their silhouettes wavering in the desert heat, each step guided by the stars and the promise of distant oasis cities. Their cargo was the very breath of the ancient world, fragrant resins of frankincense and myrrh, more valuable than gold. This was the Incense route, a network of trails crossing the Arabian Peninsula's brutal emptiness, where survival and profit were a single, delicate equation. For over 1,000 years, this trade was controlled by powerful kingdoms like Saba, famed for the Queen of Sheba, and the Nabateans, the desert's ultimate entrepreneurs. Their wealth did not spring from fertile land, but from absolute mastery over the trade's two essential elements, the incense itself and the water needed to move it. They built incredible cities like Petra, carved directly into rose-red cliffs, and Shabwa, a fortress of mud brick, not as capitals of agriculture, but as colossal, fortified service stations for the caravans. Here, archaeology reveals their genius. Vast systems of dams, cisterns, and channels captured every rare drop of rainwater, allowing them to control the flow of life itself across the desert. A caravan master would pay dearly for safe passage and a drink for his animals, making the Nabateans not just traders, but the gatekeepers of an aromatic empire. The value of their goods was rooted in ritual. Frankincense, when burned, produced a thick, sweet smoke believed to carry prayers to the heavens, making it essential for every temple from Babylon to Rome. Myrrh, with its bitter, medicinal scent, was used in ceremonies, in healing balms, and in the respectful preparation of those who had passed. This created a perfect and sacred monopoly. Demand was constant, driven by faith and status, and the supply was fiercely guarded, with the exact locations of the rare trees in southern Arabia kept a deadly secret. But why did this mighty land route, which built Petra's wonders, simply fade from the map? Its end was a story of changing currents, both political and nautical. The Roman Empire's annexation of the Nabatean kingdom in the 1st century disrupted the delicate balance of desert power. More decisively, sailors learned to harness the monsoon winds, discovering they could sail directly from the Red Sea to the source of the incense in southern Arabia and India. Why risk the bandits and droughts of a 2-month desert trek when a ship could carry 100 times the cargo in a fraction of the time? The land route slowly emptied, the great cisterns of Petra silted over, and the knowledge of those specific desert paths began to vanish from memory. Yet the cultural fragrance of that trade never fully dissipated, lingering in religious ceremonies and historical texts, a ghostly scent of a time when the desert's emptiness was woven with lines of golden commerce and devotion. High in the thin air of the Himalayas, a different kind of currency changed hands, one that steamed in a cup and thundered across battlefields. The tea-horse road was a network of trails so treacherous they defied the very idea of a road, clinging to cliff faces and crossing rope bridges over roaring gorges. For more than 1,000 years, caravans of porters and mule trains navigated this vertical world, conducting a trade that was less about luxury and more about mutual survival. From the fertile hills of Yunnan and Sichuan, they carried compact, durable bricks of fermented tea. Their destination was the high Tibetan plateau, a land perfect for raising strong, sturdy horses, but where the vegetable-free diet created a desperate need for the vitamins in tea. This was a perfect, if perilous, symbiosis. China's empires, from the Tang to the Song, needed those Tibetan warhorses to maintain their powerful cavalry against northern rivals. In return, they paid with tea, a commodity that became so central to Tibetan life it was pressed into hard bricks and used as literal money. You could buy a sheep with a brick of tea or pay a laborer with a carefully broken fragment. Beyond economics, this trade had a profound cultural effect. The tea prevented serious illness among the Tibetan population, while the continuous flow of people and goods created unique cultural hubs. Towns like Lijiang, nestled in the mountains, evolved into beautiful blends of Han and Tibetan influence, seen in their tiered wooden architecture and in the blended traditions of their communities. The operation of the route itself was a feat of human endurance. Porters, known as kotag, would carry staggering loads, sometimes over 200 pounds, along paths where a single misstep meant a fall of thousands of feet. They faced altitude sickness, bitter cold, and the constant threat of bandits in the remote passes. So why did this essential, mountainous lifeline eventually fade? Two key changes unraveled it. First, Chinese dynasties eventually improved their own horse breeding programs, reducing their desperate reliance on Tibetan stock. Second, and more decisively, the rise of reliable ocean trade in later centuries meant tea could be shipped in vast quantities by sea, making the dangerous, slow overland trek economically obsolete. The trails grew quiet, reclaimed by mountain mist and pine. Yet the legacy of the tea horse road endures not in grand monuments, but in the very cultures it intertwined. It stands as a powerful testament to how sheer human necessity can engineer connection across the most formidable geography on Earth, forging bonds not with ease, but with every difficult, deliberate step. A desert so vast its silence was a sound of its own, where survival was a currency and caravans moved mountains of salt towards mountains of gold. The Trans-Saharan routes were not mere paths but the very lifeblood of empires, turning the world's greatest desert from a barrier into a bridge. This trade hinged on a perfect imbalance, a geographical irony that powered kingdoms for centuries. In the searing heat of the Sahara, in places like the mines of Tapestry, salt was so plentiful it was cut into massive slabs from the very earth. But far to the south, in the lush rainforests and savannas of West Africa, salt was desperately scarce, a mineral essential for preserving food, maintaining health, and simply making life palatable. Meanwhile, the river basins of regions like Wangara held immense deposits of gold, panned from the rivers by local communities. This gold was abundant in the south, but held mythical value in the Mediterranean world and beyond. The Sahara, therefore, became a colossal marketplace where these two essentials crossed paths. Traders, often the nomadic Tuareg people who knew the desert's hidden wells and dangers, organized caravans of thousands of camels. These journeys were epic two-month ordeals, a slow dance with death where a missed water source or a sudden sandstorm could mean the end. To facilitate trade between people who spoke different languages and held different customs, they often employed a remarkable system known as silent barter. A group of gold traders would leave a pile of gold dust at a designated spot, then retreat. The salt merchants would approach, leave what they believed was a fair amount of salt beside the gold, and also withdraw. The gold traders would return, and if they were satisfied, they would take the salt and leave the gold. If not, they would leave the gold and retreat again, signaling the salt merchants to add more. This continued without a single spoken word, a transaction built entirely on perceived fairness and the mutual need for the goods. This system of trust, enforced by the sheer necessity of the exchange, built legendary wealth. It funded the empire of Ghana, called the Land of Gold by early Arab geographers. It built Mali, whose ruler Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca in the 14th century was so lavish with gold donations that he accidentally destabilized economies across the Mediterranean. And it built the scholarly city of Timbuktu, where the wealth from trade was invested not just in palaces, but in libraries and universities, making it a beacon of Islamic learning and culture. The caravans did not just carry salt and gold, they carried ideas, faith, and art. Islam spread peacefully along these routes, brought by merchants and scholars, and with it came Arabic script, which was adapted to write local languages, and distinct architectural styles featuring grand mosques with towering minarets. So what caused this mighty desert economy to wither? The change came not from the sand, but from the sea. In the 15th century, Portuguese mariners began sailing down the West African coast, establishing direct contact with the source of the gold. They bypassed the Saharan middlemen entirely, offering goods from the sea and redirecting the flow of wealth. Slowly, the great caravans grew smaller, the desert silence deepened, and the empires that had been built on the balance of salt and gold found their foundation shifting beneath them. Yet the legacy of those routes is etched into the cultural DNA of a continent, a reminder that even the most forbidding landscapes can be woven together by the threads of human need and ingenuity. Their ships were not just instruments of conquest, but vessels of commerce, navigating a hidden map of rivers that led to unimaginable wealth. Far from the coastal raids of Western Europe, Norse adventurers known as the Rus pushed deep into the river systems of what is now Russia and Ukraine, turning waterways like the Volga and Dnieper into a fluvial superhighway. This was the Viking Volga route, a forgotten aquatic network that connected the frosty Baltic to the warm shores of the Caspian Sea, and ultimately to the glittering markets of the Abbasid Caliphate. Their longships, designed for both open sea and shallow rivers, were loaded not with warriors, but with the treasures of the north, bundles of luxurious furs from sable and fox, blocks of golden Baltic amber, and candles of pure beeswax. In the bustling trading hubs of cities like Volga and Itul, near the Caspian, they met merchants from Baghdad and beyond. Here, the Norse traders exchanged their northern goods for something that glittered even brighter: silver. The evidence of this trade is buried in the Scandinavian soil, in the form of countless hoards of Arabic silver dirhams. These coins, struck in mints from Baghdad to Central Asia, flowed north in staggering quantities, becoming the primary silver source for all of Scandinavia, and even influencing their economy and art. But the trade was not solely in luxury items. A key commodity from the far north was walrus ivory, known as H. Valros tooth. This dense, creamy ivory was highly prized in the Islamic world for crafting intricate religious items, decorative sword hilts, and delicate gaming pieces, often more valued than elephant ivory for its workability. The Rus acted as the essential middlemen in a continental exchange. They would transport silk from the east, wine and glassware from Byzantium, and those silver dirhams back to their homelands while funneling northern goods south. This constant movement of people and goods led to the rise of pivotal settlements. Novgorod, with its vibrant marketplace, and Kiev, strategically positioned on the Dnieper, grew from fortified trading posts into powerful city-states, the very foundations of what would become Kievan Rus. This transformation from raider to merchant prince reshaped their entire society and legacy in the East. So why did this vibrant riverine trade eventually slow to a trickle? Two major shifts altered its course. First, the rich silver mines in Central Asia that supplied the Abbasid dirhams began to decline, cutting off the source of the silver that fueled the entire system. Second, as the Kievan Rus state consolidated its power, it began to exert more control over the trade, formalizing routes and relationships, which changed the free-wheeling, exploratory nature of the earlier Viking commerce. The longships eventually stopped making the long journey, but their impact was indelible. This forgotten route forces us to see the Vikings not merely as raiders, but as sophisticated connectors of continents, architects of early urban centers, and a crucial thread in the fabric that wove the medieval world. While the Vikings mastered northern rivers, an even more expansive network was being woven across the warm, monsoon-driven waters of the Indian Ocean. This was a Silk Road of the sea, a world of creaking wooden dhows and majestic Chinese junks whose voyages were dictated not by roads, but by the ancient, predictable rhythm of the winds. For centuries, this maritime web connected the porcelain kilns of China to the spice forests of India, the gem markets of Sri Lanka to the ivory ports of East Africa, creating a truly medieval global economy long before any European ship rounded the Cape of Good Hope. The entire system operated on a celestial calendar. From April to September, the southwest monsoon filled sails, pushing ships from Africa and Arabia toward India and the Spice Islands. Then, as the winds reversed from November to March, the northeast monsoon carried them home. This annual pulse meant ports like Calicut in India or Malacca in the Malay Peninsula weren't just stops, they were seasonal metropolises. Merchants from across the known world would arrive, conduct their business over several months, and then depart with the next monsoon, creating a revolving, multicultural community. The goods that moved on these winds were the stuff of legend. Black pepper from the Malabar coast was so valuable it was counted out peppercorn by peppercorn in European markets. Cinnamon from Sri Lanka, cloves and nutmeg from the distant Moluccas, Chinese silks and exquisite blue and white porcelain, vibrant cotton textiles from Gujarat, and precious gemstones all circulated in a continuous, lucrative flow. But this trade required more than just brave sailors. It required immense trust across vast distances. This led to the development of remarkably sophisticated systems. Arab and Indian merchants used advanced letters of credit known as sak, allowing a trader in Cairo to pay for spices in Zanzibar with a paper note that could be redeemed back home. In the bustling port of Malacca, a lingua franca emerged, blending Malay, Arabic, and Chinese, so a merchant from anywhere could negotiate a deal. The trade was self-governed by these merchant communities, with rules and customs that transcended any single empire's law. This constant exchange moved far more than merchandise. It was along these sea lanes that Islam spread peacefully to the coasts of India, Southeast Asia, and East Africa, carried by traders and Sufi mystics. The lateen sail, a triangular rig that allowed ships to sail remarkably close to the wind, was adopted and perfected by Arab sailors, revolutionizing maritime technology. Even culinary traditions blended, with spices from the East forever altering the cuisines of the Middle East and beyond. So what happened to this thriving, interconnected world? Its equilibrium was shattered by an arrival from the outside. When the Portuguese captain Vasco da Gama finally reached Calicut in 1498, he wasn't seeking to join this existing network. He aimed to control and tax it by force. The European caravels carried not just trade goods but cannon. The Portuguese, and later the Dutch and English, used military might to seize key ports and choke points, aiming to monopolize the spice trade at its source. This violent intrusion began the slow, painful process of dismantling the indigenous, cooperative system that had flourished for a millennium. The old rhythms of trust and monsoon winds were gradually overwritten by the dictates of armed trading companies and colonial empires. Yet for centuries, this maritime Silk Road demonstrated a profound truth, that the ocean was not a barrier, but the most efficient connective tissue the pre-modern world had ever known, binding continents together with the invisible threads of wind, water, and mutual interest. Beyond the bustling ports of the Indian Ocean, a different kind of frontier was being opened, not by monsoon winds but by the relentless, freezing breath of the taiga. The hunt for fur pushed the Russian Tsardom eastward into a seemingly endless wilderness, following the shimmering tracks of sable and ermine. This expansion was not a story of kings and courts, but of Cossack adventurers and indigenous trappers, their fates bound together by the incredible value of a single, perfect pelt. In the courts of Europe and China, fur was more than warmth. It was the ultimate symbol of status and power. A robe lined with Siberian sable, so dark and luxuriant it seemed to drink the light, could announce a ruler's authority without a single word spoken. This insatiable demand created an economic gravity that pulled explorers deeper into the unknown than any map could chart. The mechanism of control was as systematic as it was demanding, a tribute tax called the yasak. Local communities from the Nenets to the Evenki were required to pay this tax to the Tsar's representatives, and it was calculated not in coins but in furs. A certain number of prime sable pelts per hunter per year. This system transformed a luxury trade into an engine of imperial expansion, funding the state's coffers while binding the vast territory to Moscow through chains of economic obligation. The routes themselves were dictated by the land's frozen veins, the great river systems like the Ob and the Yenisei. In summer, boats carried men and supplies. In winter, sleds raced across the ice. At key portages and confluences, rough wooden forts sprang up, simple stockades that would slowly evolve into permanent towns, and eventually major cities like Irkutsk and Yakutsk. These were not just military outposts, but the nervous system of the fur trade, collection points where the yasak was gathered, and where trappers could barter for metal tools, textiles, and grain. The impact of this centuries-long hunt was profound and layered. Wildlife populations, especially the most prized species like sable, faced severe pressure, their numbers dwindling under the relentless demand. For indigenous cultures, the trade brought irreversible change, intertwining their traditional economies with a distant imperial power and introducing new materials, but also new dependencies and hardships. Yet it also forged new, if unequal, linkages across Eurasia. Siberian furs traveled west to Moscow and onward to Leipzig's great fairs, and east to the border trading town of Kayaktur, where they were exchanged for Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. This created a continental exchange that rivaled the more famous Silk Road in its geographic reach. So why did these specific trails fade from memory? The decline came from both ends of the supply chain. First, the very success of the hunt made its continuation impossible, as over-trapping led to a critical shortage of the finest furs. Second, European fashion began to shift, with beaver felt for hats and later, cheaper alternatives, reducing the prestige value of Siberian pelts. Finally, the arrival of the Trans-Siberian Railroad in the late 19th century rendered the old riverine paths obsolete, integrating Siberia into the modern world through steel rails rather than frozen waterways. The forgotten fur routes remind us that the lines on a map are often drawn by desire, by the pursuit of a commodity that captures the imagination of an era, reshaping landscapes and destinies in its wake. The value of a single bronze sword or ceremonial axe was determined by a journey spanning continents. Long before iron or steel, the alloy that defined an era, bronze, required a recipe of two metals that were almost never found together, copper and tin. This simple chemical fact created the world's first long-distance supply chains, networks so vital they connected the misty cliffs of Cornwall in Britain to the sun-drenched palaces of the Mycenaean Greeks and the mighty cities of Mesopotamia. The copper could be sourced from places like Cyprus or Anatolia, but the tin, that crucial 10% of the mix, was far rarer. One of its few major sources was the remote southwestern tip of Britain, a place that must have seemed like the very edge of the world to a Mediterranean trader. Yet, through a remarkable relay of hands and boats, Cornish tin made its way south. Archaeologists now have definitive proof, using isotope analysis like a chemical fingerprint to match tin ingots recovered from Mediterranean shipwrecks, like the one at Uluburun off the coast of Turkey, directly to the mines of ancient Britain. This means that over 3,000 years ago, raw material from the British Isles was being smelted into weapons and art for civilizations over 2,000 miles away. This trade was not managed by vast empires sending out official caravans. Instead, it operated on a system of coastal cabotage, a slow, patient hopscotch from one small harbor to the next. Independent merchants in small, sturdy boats would carry their metal ingots along the coasts of Atlantic Europe, navigating by landmark and star, trading with local communities for food, water, and safe passage. Each leg of the journey relied on deep, generational knowledge of sea currents, safe anchorages, and most importantly, alliances with the people who controlled the shore. It was a trade built on trust and mutual benefit, a decentralized network that functioned for centuries without a central authority. The bronze produced from these materials became the backbone of society, used for everything from plowshares that fed populations to the armor that defended them, making the flow of tin and copper as critical as oil is today. Then, with shocking suddenness around 1200 before Common Era, this interconnected world shattered. Across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East, great palaces like those of the Mycenaeans were burned and abandoned. Hittite imperial correspondence fell silent, trade routes seized up, and literacy itself seemed to vanish in many regions, plunging the area into a period often called a Dark Age. The causes were likely a perfect storm of hardships, including prolonged droughts that led to food shortages, migrations of displaced peoples, and the internal collapse of complex social structures. Whatever the precise catalyst, the result was a severing of those long, delicate supply lines. The knowledge of how to find Cornish tin or who to trade with along the Atlantic coast faded from memory. The Bronze Age globalized system collapsed inward, and those specific routes vanished from the historical record for centuries. The modern rediscovery of these networks through science and archaeology forces a profound rethink. It tells us that globalization is not a modern invention, but a recurring human response to technological need. The desire to build a better tool, a stronger weapon, or a more beautiful object created connections across staggering distances long before anyone had a map of the world. The story of bronze is the story of our earliest attempt to source materials from a planetary pantry, an endeavor that succeeded brilliantly for a time, only to remind us how fragile such webs of interdependence can be when the world suddenly changes. For the emperors of ancient China, the most profound virtue was not spoken but carved from stone. Deep in the distant Tarim Basin, in a region now called Xinjiang, rivers cutting down from the Kunlun Mountains carried a unique treasure within their gravel beds, nephrite jade. This particular stone, with its smooth, milky hues and incredible toughness, became more than a luxury. It was a physical embodiment of heaven's grace, of moral purity, and of immortality itself. Long before silk became the currency of cross-continental trade, the Jade Road was already threading its way through some of the most forbidding geography on Earth, connecting the celestial aspirations of Chinese civilization with the distant, dusty mines of cotton. The value of a single block of this jade was not just in its beauty, but in its story of arrival. To reach the central plains of China, it had to survive the Taklamakan Desert, a name that translates ominously as the place of no return. Traders would organize caravans to skirt its deadly edges, hopping from one fragile oasis to the next, a journey where a lost well or a shifting dune could mean the end. This immense peril was baked into the stone's worth, making jade that survived the crossing not merely an object, but a testament to human endurance. The trade created a string of flourishing oasis cities that acted as lifelines. Dunhuang, at the desert's eastern edge, became a colossal caravanserai and a spiritual crossroads. Here, wealth from the jade trade funded the carving of magnificent Buddhist cave temples into the cliffs, their walls covered in intricate paintings that blended Chinese, Indian, and Central Asian styles. These caves, like the famous Mogao grottos, became time capsules, preserving not just art but thousands of manuscripts, effectively serving as libraries in the desert. This points to the route's deeper function. It was a conduit for ideas. While jade flowed east, Buddhism traveled west from India into China along these same oasis pathways. The faith found fertile ground among the merchants and patrons who had grown wealthy from the stone trade, and the iconography in the caves at Dunhuang shows this beautiful synthesis happening in real time. The Jade Road also facilitated a quieter but equally vital exchange of technology. The hard nephrite from cotton is tougher than steel, and working it required incredible skill. The grinding and polishing techniques developed by Cottonese craftsmen, using sand and water with precise abrasives, were technologies in their own right, and their influence likely traveled back along the route into China, refining local lapidary arts. So why did this spiritually charged network, which built oasis metropolises, eventually recede from prominence? The change was one of shifting imperial taste and economic practicality. As Chinese dynasties evolved, other materials like gold, gemstones, and later porcelain began to capture the court's imagination. Furthermore, the later Silk Road, running along similar corridors, absorbed and generalized the traffic. The jade trade continued, of course, but it was no longer the singular, defining force that structured the entire network. The specific, perilous trails dedicated solely to transporting the stone faded from common knowledge, subsumed by the broader tapestry of Eurasian exchange. The legacy of the Jade Road, however, cuts deeper than commerce. it demonstrates a powerful historical truth that networks can be woven from threads of belief as easily as from threads of necessity. A civilization's longing for a symbol of heaven, for a piece of the eternal, proved powerful enough to chart a permanent line across a murderous desert, creating cities of art and scholarship in the sand, and quietly paving the way for the spiritual transformation of an empire. The sun-bleached coral stone of Kilwa's palaces held a complex history within its walls, a testament to a coast that was both a vibrant crossroads and a place of profound hardship. The Swahili city-states from Mogadishu to Sofala were not passive outposts but sophisticated commercial hubs, their economies built on a trade that flowed in two directions. From the African interior came ivory, the coveted tusks that would be carved into intricate religious items in India and luxury trinkets in China, and gold, panned from rivers far inland. In return, dhows from Arabia and Gujarat brought fine cotton cloth, glazed ceramics from Persia, and glass beads, goods that were carried back into the heart of the continent. This exchange integrated powerful interior kingdoms into a vast economic network, with the monumental stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe standing as a powerful symbol of the wealth generated from this continental gold trade. The cultural synthesis along the coast was remarkable, giving birth to the Swahili language, a Bantu grammar woven with Arabic vocabulary, and an architectural style where ornate Arabic doorways and coral masonry reflected a blended identity. Yet woven into this fabric of commerce was a tragic and difficult chapter, the movement of individuals caught in the slave trade. This aspect of the route presents a challenging history, one where the economic forces that built cosmopolitan ports also inflicted deep suffering. The delicate balance of this Indian Ocean system was shattered by external intervention. In the early 16th century, Portuguese warships arrived, not to trade within the existing network, but to conquer its key ports like Kilwa and Mombasa, aiming to seize control of the gold routes at their source. Their forts still dot the coastline, stark reminders of a violent shift from partnership to domination. Later, Omani Arab powers would reassert control, further altering the political landscape. The legacy of these routes is therefore layered and indelible, shaping the language, culture, and very architecture of the Swahili coast, while also leaving a somber imprint on the historical memory of the Indian Ocean world. Centuries before the Hanseatic League's cog ships dominated the Baltic, the dense forests and winding rivers of northern Europe already hummed with commerce. This was a world of small-scale, seasonal exchange, where a local hunter from the Finnish woods might meet a Slavic river trader at a sacred grove, their goods laid out on simple cloths. Amber gathered from the coast, bundles of luxurious fox and beaver pelts, blocks of fragrant beeswax for candles, and pots of thick forest honey. These were the commodities that fueled a sprawling, informal network. The geography dictated the routes. Traders used the great rivers like highways, paddling and portaging their dug-out boats from the Baltic watershed down toward the Black Sea. The Dnieper River, in particular, became a vital north-south artery, allowing goods from the Baltic forests to eventually reach the wealthy markets of Byzantium and the Abbasid Caliphate, linking two distant seas through a chain of human effort. This system operated on a rhythm set by nature and faith. Trade often coalesced around seasonal fairs held at specific times of the year, coinciding with natural plenty or the completion of harvests. Perhaps more fascinatingly, pagan religious sites, sacred groves, or riverside shrines frequently served as neutral ground for exchange. These were places of truce where different tribes and language groups could meet under a shared, if diverse, spiritual understanding to barter safely. The goods flowing from these northern forests were not luxuries for the elite alone. They were essentials for a changing Europe. As towns within the Holy Roman Empire began to grow, their artisans needed beeswax for the candles that lit workshops and churches. Their merchants sought furs for warmth in unheated stone buildings, and amber for crafting religious rosaries and amulets. The demand from these developing urban centers pulled northern goods south with increasing force, giving shape and economic reason to routes that had once been sporadic and local. This diffuse, organic web could not last forever. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the rising merchant cities of northern Germany, like Lübeck and Hamburg, saw the immense value in organizing and protecting this trade. They began to form alliances, standardizing weights, securing safe passage, and establishing permanent trading posts or contours in foreign ports like Novgorod and Bergen. This was the birth of the Hanseatic League, a formidable commercial federation. In many ways, the League did not invent Baltic trade, it simply absorbed it. It built its powerful monopoly directly atop these ancient, informal pathways, imposing new rules, tariffs, and structures. The independent identities of the old Viking, Slavic, and Baltic trading circuits faded, their stories swallowed by the bureaucratic efficiency of the Hanseatic ledgers. This quiet absorption is why we so easily forget the earlier networks. Their legacy, however, is fundamental. It demonstrates a recurring pattern in human history, where the grassroots exchanges of countless individuals, meeting at sacred groves and seasonal fairs, inevitably paved the way for the rise of more centralized, powerful economic systems. The formal empire of commerce is almost always preceded by a frontier of personal connection and trust. The deepest blue in the ancient world was not a pigment, but a piece of the night sky brought to earth. This was Lapis Lazuli, a stone mined from a single, harsh mountain range in what is now Afghanistan, then transported across deserts and mountains to become the sacred adornment of pharaohs and the signature of Mesopotamian kings. Its journey, beginning over 3,000 years ago, reveals a trade network of astonishing indirectness, where a stone could cross a continent without a single merchant ever seeing its source. The mines of Badakhshan were so remote and difficult to access that the stone's origin was shrouded in myth for millennia, with cultures like the Egyptians believing it came from a divine, celestial realm. Yet, through a slow relay of intermediaries, Lapis moved. One group would extract the rough stone, another would carry it to the edge of their territory, and another would take it further, its value increasing with every hand it passed through. This indirect system, built on trust and specialized knowledge, functioned for centuries before any empire could claim to control the entire route. The evidence of its reach is written in artifacts across the ancient world. In the royal tombs of Ur, Sumerian queens were buried with lavish headdresses inlaid with lapis. In Egypt, the funeral mask of the young pharaoh Tutankhamun features the stone's vivid blue in the stripes of his Nemes headcloth and the inlay of his eyes, a color meant to symbolize divinity and protection in the afterlife. Even in the distant Indus Valley city of Harappa, archaeologists have found beads and small ornaments crafted from this Afghan stone. The value of lapis went far beyond mere decoration. Its intense, celestial blue was associated with the heavens, with the gods, and with cosmic truth. In Mesopotamia, it was crushed into a fine powder to create the prized pigment ultramarine, used to paint the eyes of sacred statues, making them see with divine authority. Cylinder seals, the personal signatures of officials and rulers, were carved from it, their impressions in clay carrying the weight of both law and heavenly favor. The route itself became a channel for more than just stone. As Lapis moved through major urban hubs like Ur or Harappa, it drew other luxuries into its current. Traders would bring textiles, metals, and exotic woods to exchange, while stories, technological ideas, and artistic motifs traveled alongside the material goods. This turned a commodity path into a corridor of cultural cross-pollination. So why did such a prestigious route fade from primary historical focus? Its decline was not a collapse but a dilution. Other civilizations developed their own brilliant blue pigments, most notably the Egyptians with their synthetic Egyptian blue. While Lapis Lazuli never lost its prestige, it was no longer the sole source of that sacred color for the Mediterranean world. Furthermore, as later, more direct trade routes like the Silk Road emerged, the specific, secretive relay system that characterized the Lapis trade was absorbed into broader, more documented networks. The stone kept traveling, but the unique, myth-shrouded pathway that first connected the mountains of Afghanistan to the tombs of Egypt gradually blurred, becoming just one thread in the later, more famous tapestry of Eurasian exchange. The true source of cinnamon was a secret worth more than the spice itself. For over 1,000 years, the origins of those fragrant, curled quills were shrouded in deliberate mystery, a geographical riddle maintained by Arab and Indian traders to protect the most lucrative monopoly of the ancient world. To their customers in Greece and Rome, they told fantastical stories, claiming cinnamon was harvested from the nests of giant birds, the cynomologus, in a land beyond Ethiopia. Others said it was guarded by deadly serpents in deep, sunless valleys. These were not just tall tales, they were a brilliant commercial strategy, a smokescreen of myth that kept competitors at bay and prices astronomically high. The reality, hidden behind this curtain of legend, was a relay system of breathtaking distance and complexity. The cinnamon trees grew in the rainforests of Sri Lanka, an island the Greeks called Taprobane, and possibly in parts of Southeast Asia. From there, the harvest began a long journey. Local outrigger canoes and small coastal dhows would carry the bark to ports on the Indian subcontinent. There, it was transferred to larger Arab dhows, which caught the predictable monsoon winds across the Indian Ocean to ports like Aden and Muscat on the Arabian Peninsula. Finally, overland caravans or another sea leg through the Red Sea would bring it to the Mediterranean markets of Alexandria, where Venetian and Genoese merchants would pay fortunes to distribute it throughout Europe. The entire chain was designed to be opaque. No single group controlled it from source to final sale, which made the secret impossible to steal. The Greco-Roman world's desire for cinnamon was insatiable. It was not merely a culinary luxury, it was burned in vast quantities in religious ceremonies, its sweet smoke believed to please the gods. It was a key ingredient in precious perfumes and unguents, and was valued in traditions of wellness. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder lamented that Rome spent over 50 million sesterces a year on Eastern luxuries like cinnamon, a drain of silver he saw as a moral failing. This immense demand is what made the mystery so valuable and so fiercely protected. The hunger to solve that mystery ultimately rewrote the map. By the late 15th century, European powers, fueled by stories from travelers like Marco Polo, were desperate to break the Arab and Venetian stranglehold. They sought a direct sea route to the Indies not just for spices but for the knowledge behind them. When the Portuguese admiral Vasco da Gama reached the coast of India in 1498, his first questions were about Christians and spices. Within a few years, Portuguese fleets armed with cannon pushed further east. In 1515, they violently arrived in Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, and confronted the truth. There were no mythical birds, only trees and a sophisticated local industry they could now seize. The Portuguese, followed by the Dutch and then the British, established direct colonial control over the cinnamon groves. They organized plantations, enforced brutal harvesting regimes, and shipped the spice directly to Europe around the Cape of Good Hope. In that moment, the ancient clandestine network shattered. The relay of trust and specialized knowledge was replaced by the efficiency of colonial extraction. The route lost its mystique and its unique structure, becoming a simple, brutal supply line on a European map. The cinnamon route story is a powerful lesson in how value can be manufactured not just from a commodity, but from the deliberate obscurity that surrounds it. It proves that sometimes the most compelling force driving exploration and empire is not gold or territory, but the simple, burning desire to know a secret and own the truth behind it. The quest for a sharper edge shaped the very first maps of human interaction. Long before bronze or iron, the most valuable commodity in the Stone Age world was a jet-black volcanic glass known as obsidian. When fractured, it produces edges hundreds of times sharper than a modern surgical scalpel, making it the ultimate material for cutting tools, arrowheads, and blades. This geological gift was not found everywhere, only in specific volcanic regions like central Anatolia, the mountains of Armenia, and islands like Milos in the Aegean Sea. Yet, blades crafted from this glass have been discovered in villages and burial sites hundreds of miles from any volcano. This is the story of the obsidian trade, the silent, sharp network that connected our earliest farming communities. Modern science allows us to trace these journeys with precision. Using a technique called X-ray fluorescence, archaeologists can analyze the unique chemical fingerprint of an obsidian artifact and match it directly to its source volcano. A blade found in a Neolithic village in modern-day Syria, for example, can be proven to have originated from a quarry in central Turkey, over 400 miles away. This creates a map not of empires but of footsteps, revealing pathways of exchange that existed 6,000 years before the first written word. The mechanism of this trade was likely a slow, patient relay known as down-the-line exchange. A community living near the obsidian source would quarry the glass and trade some of it with their immediate neighbors for other goods, perhaps fine flint or foodstuffs. Those neighbors would then trade some of that obsidian, now a step removed from its source, with the next community over. In this way, the material could travel incredible distances without a single individual making the entire journey. Each transaction was more than an economic act. It was a social one, reinforcing alliances, creating obligations, and weaving a web of interdependence across the landscape. This network did more than distribute a superior toolstone. It transmitted ideas, the techniques for expertly knapping obsidian, for pressure flaking a perfect leaf-shaped point, traveled along with the raw material. So too did stylistic preferences for certain tool shapes, which archaeologists can trace spreading from region to region. The flow of this black glass facilitated the diffusion of Neolithic technology itself, helping to standardize and improve toolkits across vast areas. But why did such a vital network eventually fade? The answer lies in a technological revolution. Around 5,000 years ago, humans mastered the smelting of copper and later the alloying of bronze. While early metal tools were often softer and less sharp than a good obsidian blade, they had one decisive advantage: they could be reworked. A broken bronze axe could be melted and recast. A shattered obsidian blade was just Chinese letter. As metallurgy advanced and became more widespread, the practical necessity for long-distance obsidian trade diminished. The specific trails to those ancient quarries, walked for millennia, began to grow faint. Yet obsidian never completely lost its value. Its gleaming, dark beauty and conchoidal fracture gave it an aura of magic. In later ages, from the Americas to the Mediterranean, it was fashioned into ceremonial mirrors, ritual blades, and protective amulets, its practical purpose transformed into a sacred one. The story of the obsidian trade cuts to a core truth about our species. It reveals that the drive to seek out superior resources, to connect with distant others, and to share knowledge is not a product of complex civilization, but its very foundation. These first fragile lines of exchange, traced in volcanic glass, were the initial sketches of the connected world we inhabit today. A final forgotten current flowed not across land, but beneath the waves of the Mediterranean itself. While the Roman legions marched on roads, a quieter, more colorful commerce was conducted by divers plunging into the deep blue waters off Sicily and North Africa. Their prize was a living treasure, the dense, branching red coral, a material that would embark on a journey all the way to the temples and workshops of southern India. This created a vibrant bilateral circuit, a two-way street of the ancient seas where coral flowed east, and Indian silver, pearls, and precious spices like pepper flowed back west into the coffers of Rome and later Byzantium. A remarkable first-century guide for merchants, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, maps this precise exchange, revealing how regional trades were stitched into a single, intercontinental system. In the Tamil kingdoms of India, this Mediterranean coral held a significance far beyond decoration. Its intense red hue was associated with sacred power and vitality, making it a preferred material for crafting intricate jewelry for temple deities and for amulets believed to offer protection. This created a consistent, almost devotional demand that merchants could reliably count on, season after season. The practical execution of this trade was a masterpiece of logistical coordination. It required navigating the complex political geography of the era, from the administrative might of the Roman Empire to the bustling, independent ports of the Tamil coast. Success hinged on two things: the predictable calendar of the monsoon winds, which dictated the sailing seasons, and the trusted networks of merchant guilds who managed the handoff of goods and guaranteed the quality of the cargo. A Roman merchant might never meet his Indian counterpart face to face, but he trusted the system that connected them. The stability of this niche trade, however, was tied to the fate of empires. The gradual fragmentation of the Roman world in the West and the subsequent rise of powerful Islamic caliphates in the 7th and 8th centuries dramatically reconfigured the Mediterranean's economic map. These new powers did not destroy the coral and spice routes, they absorbed and rerouted them. Arab traders became the new middlemen, carrying the coral east and channeling the spices through their own vibrant networks in Cairo and Baghdad. Centuries later, the Italian maritime republics, most notably Venice, would leverage their position to dominate what remained of this ancient exchange, turning it into a source of immense Renaissance wealth. The story of the coral routes is a subtle but profound coda to our journey. It demonstrates that the globalized medieval economy was not built solely on bulk commodities like silk or spices, but often on the sustained demand for highly specialized niche goods. A beautiful, blood-red substance pulled from one sea could fuel a complex, resilient relationship with a civilization on the opposite side of the known world, proving that connection, in the end, could be woven from the most unexpected of threads. These 15 routes were never truly separate, but strands in a vast, shimmering web that covered the continents long before anyone could see its full design. Stepping back, we see a grand tapestry of interconnection, where the Amber Road fed the wealth of Viking traders, whose silver from the Volga route would eventually be traded for Indian spices carried on the monsoon winds. These paths constantly intersected and influenced one another, creating a form of proto-globalization that pulsed with life for centuries. The common threads binding them together reveal a profound human ingenuity. Each route relied on deep, generational environmental knowledge, whether it was a Tuareg guide memorizing the Sahara's hidden wells or a Malay sailor reading the subtle shifts of the monsoon. They all depended on the creation of neutral trading hubs, sacred groves, oasis cities, or seasonal ports where diverse peoples could meet under shared rules of commerce, setting aside conflict for mutual benefit. And at every crossroads, from the Swahili coast to the caves of Dunhuang, a beautiful cultural hybridization occurred, giving birth to new languages, architectural styles, and artistic traditions. Yet the stories of their ends carry a sobering echo. Historians note that these resilient networks often faded not from a single blow, but from a cascade of challenges. Shifts in climate could dry up crucial oases or alter agricultural patterns that supported trading towns. Political upheaval, like the fall of Rome or the rise of new empires, could sever the delicate threads of diplomatic trust that protected caravans. Technological disruption, such as the mastery of monsoon sailing that doomed the Incense route, could render a 1,000-mile overland trek obsolete overnight. And the movement of people and goods along these highways sometimes inadvertently carried unseen hardships, as illnesses could travel alongside spices and silks, impacting populations with no prior exposure. These are not merely ancient footnotes, but lessons in vulnerability that resonate deeply in our own hyper-connected modern world. This rediscovery fundamentally challenges a long-held historical narrative. The so-called Age of Discovery, often framed as the moment Europe connected the world, was in many ways a late and violent interruption of a system that was already mature and sophisticated. For millennia before Portuguese caravels rounded the Cape, goods, ideas, and people were circulating across hemispheres through these indigenous, organically grown networks. Understanding these forgotten routes reframes our entire perception of the past. It helps us appreciate the astonishing depth and antiquity of cultural exchange and economic interdependence. It reminds us that connection, not isolation, has been the default creative state of human history for thousands of years. Our modern global map was not drawn by explorers in a single era, but slowly etched into the landscape by the countless footsteps of merchants, pilgrims, and adventurers whose names we will never know, walking paths we are only now beginning to remember. The world has always been more connected than our maps have ever shown. Our journey across these 15 forgotten arteries reveals a profound truth that long before satellites or even accurate globes, humanity was weaving a complex web of interdependence. These routes were the original social networks, transmitting far more than spices and stones. They carried the very building blocks of civilization, new languages whispered between merchants at a caravanserai, sacred faiths carried gently by pilgrims and traders, revolutionary technologies like the Latin sail or advanced metallurgy, and even the genetic threads of our shared ancestry, as people settled and intermingled far from their ancestral homes. This hidden lattice of exchange challenges the simplistic story of isolated cultures, revealing instead a past rich with dialogue, adaptation, and shared innovation. History, it turns out, is not a collection of separate rooms, but a single, vast hall where voices have been echoing back and forth for millennia, their connections often waiting just beneath the surface for us to rediscover. As we close this map of lost pathways, it is worth pausing to see the reflection of our own world. Our digital networks, with their instantaneous flow of information and ideas, are simply the latest iteration of this ancient, relentless human drive to connect. We are still following those same impulses that sent a trader into the Taklamakan desert or a sailor onto the monsoon seas, the desire to reach beyond the known, to share, to discover, and to belong to something larger than our immediate horizon. If these stories of hidden connection have sparked your curiosity, there are countless more waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe to join us for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of our past. And we would love to hear from you which of these lost routes resonates most with your imagination, the Golden Amber Road, the perilous Tea-Horse Trails, or perhaps the silent barter of the Sahara. Thank you for exploring these unseen maps of history with us.